Welcome, everyone. We're diving into what really makes the Chinese economic model so unique. It's like a blend of ingenious policymaking and dynamic public-private interplay, right where the state policy sets the vision while the market energies execute it.
Absolutely. It's that dynamic duality, sort of a top down vision meshed with bottom up innovation that really sets the stage for rapid development and, yeah, robust growth.
Exactly. One key idea touched upon is what Keyu calls China's new playbook. It examines how China's model isn't strictly socialist or capitalist, but a hybrid system that's evolved over time.
Right, and it's really intriguing because the model emphasizes a kind of constructive interplay between state guided policies and entrepreneurial spirit. And it's not just about rigid planning, it's also flexible enough to allow, market forces to drive innovation.
Yep, that's spot on. And have you noticed how the conversation even delves into something like a pendulum theory? It's like a theory of constant balancing between two extremes. Sometimes it's more state driven, and other times it's these market led dynamics swinging back into
Yep.
action. Quite a roller coaster.
Absolutely. It's almost as if you're watching a pendulum swing that ensures the system doesn't drift too far into either extreme. So, on one end, you might have intense state intervention, and on the other end, open market dynamism.
And then there's the ideological side of things. Keyu points out that the ideological framing isn't about strict adherence to one school of thought. It's like it leverages the best parts of socialism and capitalism to create an environment that nurtures growth while, well, keeping some control under the belt.
Yeah, the blend is fascinating, especially when you integrate economic statecraft into the mix. Here, we see how the state plays a role in steering innovation and economic outcomes through targeted policies.
Right on. Now think about this. While many international commentators often label China as overly rigid or uniquely autocratic, Jin's conversation suggests it's more nuanced. It's an adaptive system where private sector dynamism is balanced with state oversight. It's
Right.
like cooking with two different ingredients that, when mixed well, create an exceptional dish.
Absolutely. But, there's also this interesting critique. Some argue that the model leans too heavily on state subsidies and state owned enterprises, sometimes leading to inefficiencies. How do you think that plays out in the long run?
That's a great point. Keyu does talk about the challenge of improving state owned enterprise efficiency. The idea is that while the state provides stable support, it also faces pressure to innovate and mirror the efficiency of the private sector. But it's not a perfect system.
Right.
There's always tension between stability and innovation.
Exactly. And that tension often sparks debates. For instance, there's some concern that too much state intervention could stifle, private creative energy. Yet, on the flip side, too little oversight might lead to fragmentation or inequality.
Yep, and it's this balancing act that is at the heart of the Chinese economic model discussion. And let me add, it's like an orchestra where both the conductor, the state, and the musicians, the enterprises, must harmonize perfectly. Otherwise, you get a cacophony.
That's a vivid metaphor. And speaking of harmonizing, another aspect that stands out is the interplay between rural and urban development. The model has been critiqued for creating gaps here, but it's also been praised for innovative policies aimed at bridging these divides.
Yeah, it's significant. While urban centers often pull ahead as innovation hubs, there's a strong drive within the policy framework to uplift rural regions too. This approach is part of a larger strategy to ensure that stimulus isn't concentrated in just one segment, right? It's a nationwide
Exactly.
balancing act.
And then we have the so-called mayor economy concept, which is fascinating. Local government leaders in China, sometimes like mayors, are empowered to innovate within their regions, serving as testing grounds for broader policy initiatives.
Oh, totally. It's it's like a microcosm of the whole national strategy. You empower local leaders, and then successful experiments get rolled out more broadly. It's a bottom-up element, merging with top-down
Yes.
planning. That local flavor really underscores the adaptability of the general model.
And what about international perspectives? I find it interesting how Sino-American relations also come into play here. The conversation hints at how this unique economic model not only drives domestic growth, but also influences global economic dynamics, especially in relation to, the G7 playbook.
Precisely. The conversation brings up the question, can this China playbook thrive indefinitely in the face of external pressures? The interplay between innovation and state centric policies makes it both robust and a bit vulnerable to, say, trade tensions or geopolitical pressures. It's a delicate balance.
Absolutely, exactly. And sometimes it feels like the international commentators miss that nuance. They can either overstate China's strategy as overly authoritarian or conversely, romanticize its rapid growth without acknowledging the systemic challenges.
Right, and while some insist that the Chinese model is a one size fits all solution, the reality is much more layered. For example, Keyu emphasizes that while strong state guidance works in certain contexts, it does require constant recalibration, especially with external economic shocks and shifting domestic priorities.
Yeah, that's a fair critique. Totally. And if we compare this with the conventional G7 playbook, we notice fundamental differences in approach. The G7 model leans heavily on liberal market principles and often struggles with the kind of centralized coordination that we see in the Chinese model.
Yes, and that's a key point. While the G7's approach might promote a more laissez faire environment, the Chinese model employs state led initiatives to buffer against the volatility of free markets. You could say it's like having an insurance policy built into the economy, ensuring some level of predictability in turbulent times.
Though I've got to wonder, isn't there an inherent risk in that level of control? One could argue that excessive intervention might eventually limit innovation because, nothing beats the organic hustle of market forces on their own.
That's a solid point, and I do see where that critique comes from. But remember, the Chinese model continuously evolves. It's almost like a constant experiment, adjusting policies, recalibrating subsidies, and sometimes even overhauling state enterprise management to inject private sector style efficiency.
Yeah, that iterative nature is key. And let's not forget about economic statecraft, using economic tools strategically to gain geopolitical leverage. The conversation touches on how China uses economic incentives and sometimes subsidies as a tool in international relations.
For sure, and that's where things get particularly interesting. Economic statecraft isn't just about domestic policy, it's about projecting influence and creating interdependencies on the global stage. It raises the stakes when discussing Sino American relations, because trade,
Right,
investment,
exactly.
and diplomacy are all intertwined.
Yeah, and this blending of internal economic strategy with external statecraft really makes of the Chinese economic model a unique case study. The model, in many ways, is a direct reflection of China's historical and cultural context too, which adds another layer to its distinctiveness.
Absolutely. Historical roots and cultural legacies, like the emphasis on collective effort and pragmatic governance, all feed into the modern playbook. And while it's been incredibly successful over the past decades, the future remains an open question, especially with new challenges like demographic shifts and technology disruptions.
That's true. And speaking of the future, do you think this model can sustainably navigate the global arena, particularly with increasing polarization in international politics?
I think, ultimately, its sustainability will hinge on its ability to reform internally while smartly leveraging external opportunities. The balance between private and public sectors, plus managing the inevitable friction with Western economic paradigms, will be crucial.
Right, I
It's a
agree.
constant balancing act indeed.
It's almost like walking a tightrope, isn't it? On one side, you have the stability and control provided by the state, and on the other, you have the innovative, sometimes unpredictable force of the market.
Exactly, exactly. And as Keyu pointed out, this isn't a simple either or situation. It's a dynamic interplay that allows for rapid adaptation. Even criticisms regarding inefficiencies in state run programs are met with ongoing reforms.
True. I must respectfully challenge one notion, though. While the model has been praised for its adaptability, isn't there also a risk of, Overdependence on government intervention that might eventually dampen grassroots innovation?
That's a very valid point, and indeed, there's a risk if the balance tips too far toward control. But that's exactly why we see this continuous policy recalibration. The state isn't static, it's learning from past inefficiencies and adjusting its approach. It's like a feedback
Absolutely.
loop that, while not perfect, is designed to evolve continuously.
Right, and that, I think, is the beauty of this model. Its inherent ability to adapt, even if that sometimes means making tough decisions or reforms on the fly.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this discussion, it's clear that the Chinese economic model is special precisely because it doesn't adhere rigidly to any one ideology. Instead, it's pragmatic, iterative, and contextually responsive. A model that has allowed China to, thrive economically and developmentally. It's an ongoing experiment
Yep.
in balancing power and innovation.
All in all, the conversation with Keyu really unpacks just how multifaceted this model is and shows that while there are risks, the dynamic interplay between state guidance and market forces is what has driven its success.
Exactly. And it leaves us wondering how this playbook will continue evolving in our increasingly interconnected and sometimes divided world. That's our
Indeed.
deep dive into what makes the Chinese economic model so special. Thanks for the great insights.